Welcome back to our politics. Now, when it comes to taxing big tech companies, a competition looks to be shaping up. While announcing the UK budget yesterday, Chancellor Philip Hammond unveiled plans to slap the likes of Google and Facebook with steep new taxes and raise €450 million a year for the government.
The UK has been leading attempts to deliver international corporate tax reform for the digital age. A new global agreement is the best long-term solution, but progress is painfully slow. We cannot simply talk forever. So we will now introduce a UK digital services tax.
All right. Meanwhile, France is leading the European charge to hike taxes on big tech. President Macron even sent his finance minister to Strasbourg to put pressure on EU leaders, but the plan would require the support of all 28 EU members. The cross-channel offensive comes at a time for record profits for tech giants, and they argue higher taxes would stifle innovation and investment. Now, to discuss all these tech and tax, we have our political editor at euronews, Darren McCaffrey, joining us back in the studio, James Crisps, Brussels correspondent at The Telegraph, and Jennifer Baker, technology reporter from BrusselsGeek.com. All right, Jennifer, I'll start with you. Is the timing interesting for you that this is happening? You know, this is a feel-good story. It's going up against the big giants. People like this.
Well, yeah, and I think that's primarily what this is about, because it's not really going to raise a huge amount of money set in the greater context of the British budget. The timing, I mean, of course, happens as we were getting out in front, but in fact, the European Commission had already started talking about a digital tax as long ago as last year and set out some proposals in March of this year. Now, they're not exactly the same, but, you know, there may be lessons to learn for the EU from what he has proposed. I mean, things like thresholds were always going to be part of this so that smaller companies don't get caught in this net and we don't stifle innovation, which is always the big fear that tech companies trot out every time there's any sort of tax. And of course, they don't want to pay it. Who wants to pay it? What private individual, what company wants to pay more tax? But it's a political football that should be popular with consumers.
Yeah, you were saying earlier, Darren, that you think that the UK wanted to get at it first, to be the first.
Yeah, and these are tentative steps. It's interesting. I think the OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility in the UK, said it was incredibly difficult to estimate, but they think possibly it might raise £400 million. Now, in the grand scheme of things, that isn't an awful lot of money. But it's more tax than these companies are paying at the moment. You look at like Amazon and Google and Facebook raising billions of pounds worth of revenue in the UK and paying mere millions in taxation. But yeah, I think it is interesting, 5 months out of Brexit, considering Europe's been grappling with this issue, as you say, for a couple of years, clearly divided on it. France wants to march off in one direction of charging this tax. For Ireland, it would be an absolute nightmare as large parts of their economy is based on it. So for the UK, in a sense, to be seen to take the lead and a responsible lead, is clearly sending a signal to Brussels.
Yeah, or to say, you know, when we're out of the EU, we can finally do these things on our own without anyone stopping us.
Well, but it's definitely an element that once you're out of the EU, you can press ahead and get it done quicker. What's actually, I think, very interesting is what Darren was alluding to. The fact is that, you know, this is going to be difficult for Ireland. You know, EU tax law needs unanimity. So if they're going to do something here in Brussels, Ireland has to cave in. And of course, Ireland kind of owes the EU now because the EU's backed them over the Irish backstop. So, you know, solidarity doesn't come for free, and I think it's possibly time that Dublin's going to have to pay. Well, as you can see, I'm very upset about that.
Well, America thinks it's going to pay, so let's look at this from that perspective. These companies that we're talking about, they are, let's be honest, they're the big American giants, the GAFAs. And there is, from their perspective, this kind of zero-sum game, because there's a lot of argument that you take money from those companies to pay in tax in Europe, and the US is going, hang on, our coffers are falling, because, you know, they see that as a complete zero-sum game. And I normally say, oh, it's not one or the other, but in this case, yeah, it may very well be.
So you think it's one or the other?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a finite amount that you can tax these companies, and they will say, Google always say, we pay all the taxes we owe. It's just, where do you owe them? Right. And if the EU or the UK can claw those back to the UK or the EU, that means they will be able to claim discounts on what they owe in the US.
But I mean, just one thing about that is, what's interesting here is the advantage of being first mover as well. So Britain can send out two messages here. One message is, no, we are not going to turn ourselves into a Singapore without the sun, slash tax, all of that. We're going to do this in a responsible way, as Darren says. The other message it sends is, we can move on this, and then international standard setters, like the OECD, maybe will take notice. And that's something which makes people in Brussels kind of nervous. When Michel Barnier talks about the autonomy of our decision-making, he's actually talking about putting in safeguards to prevent Britain making regulatory decisions which would then influence and even shape EU regulation.
It almost feels like tech companies are pawns in a more political way.
I wouldn't go that far. I mean, many of them are not bigger than countries, so I wouldn't feel that. I mean, I think the one country that should be concerned in all this is Ireland, because in the event of, for example, if there was no Brexit deal, we all know that would hit Ireland almost as badly as the UK. The agri-food sector in Ireland would essentially be devastated overnight. Right. And to add to that, the second tenet of the Irish economy, which is based on having all these American multinational firms based there and employing people, both of those scenarios were pretty devastating.
People in each office.
This story is not over for sure. And Jennifer, you'll be keeping a close eye on this.